Well, Spike, I'm going to turn this down a little. I don't even know if you guys can hear it. This is all by the edge of our seat, the underwear type of thing. We're figuring this out as we go. I'm sitting here producing by myself in the library, and I got to tell you, it's we've come full circle now, because I think the first time we really interfaced, I was talking to you on your podcast. Is that right? Oh, I got you muted, my friend.
No, that's my fault. I had my mic muted. Yes, we have come full circle. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, good. We have come full circle because now not only are you interviewing me, but I'm wearing the shirt that you designed for me about a year or so ago.
It looks good. It looks
Yes,
good. It's the same machine right over here. I built that T-shirt on. I built my local Libertarian T-shirt on.
fantastic.
So it looks good on you.
We're all wearing Dwayne wear.
How have you been, man? I don't think I've seen you since Ohio, was it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh,
So, no, go ahead. How you been?
Things have been going incredible. It's been a whirlwind. Since the last time I saw you, Your the Power has continued to grow by leaps and bounds. We are working on multiple causes across the country right now, and we're getting feedback now that there have been some people who were dealing with issues, and we can talk more about this later, but they've been dealing with issues in their local community, and they'll put their local officials on notice and say, hey, if you don't do the right thing here, we're going to contact this group and have them get involved. And then either, I don't want to say I know it's because they said it was our group, but hearing that a group was going to get involved, they backed off and did the right thing. So it really has come full circle, and it's really it's incredible to watch it just kind of blossom from the idea we had a couple of years ago.
So tell me the story of how you went from shirtless vice presidential candidate to grassroots activist who's terrifying city councils across the country.
Well, so first step was I put a shirt on. So that was a very
Nice.
powerful. Yeah, so it's funny because when I ran for the vice presidential nomination, I think I've talked with you about this before, but when I ran for the nomination, I didn't think for a second I was actually going to get it. There were so many other better and more established names in the Libertarian Party at the time, and I thought, I'll go in and I will use this run for the nomination as an opportunity to talk about what I see that we could be doing better from my experience as a business owner and in sales and marketing and so forth. Here's what I've learned about how to reach people with ideas and things that we can be doing. And apparently I did a good job at it because then they gave me the nomination. And so there was this kind of very quick pivot I had to take of, oh, wow, so they're actually, maybe a couple weeks before the actual nomination, I realized, yeah, I'm probably going to get this thing. We were doing informal whip counts and everything. And I thought, okay, all right, so I guess I have to do it. So that's when the pivot, went away from or began away from I'm just trying to make a point about how we can do things better and actually doing it. While I was running, I learned a lot of additional things. One thing that was really driven home was it's the local grassroots where things are happening. You can make these great plans at a national or central level, but it's the people on the ground that are making these decisions. And frankly, it's the people on the ground that are the best suited to know what their community needs. And that speaks to what we believe as libertarians. This is why a big part of why we're against central planning is that we recognize that individuals and small communities know far better what they need than someone outside of it, estimating what it is that they need. So I learned that, and I also realized we had a lot of work to do in bringing people to an understanding of what it is we're even proposing. Not just what libertarianism or what liberty means, but what it means for them, how it actually helps them. And so coming out of the campaign, I thought, we have uh, we have all these issues that really align if you think about it. We have a lot of stagnation in the movement, a lot of finger pointing and blaming, a lot of kind of a lack of a blueprint of how to move forward. We have a lot of people doing great stuff, but there doesn't seem to be that kind of silver bullet to really get it out there, get the ideas out there. And then we also have people that are suffering as a result of abusive and overbearing governments across the country. And I thought, well, you can solve those problems together. And it was so I kind of went back to first principles. Well, why do we do this? Because we want to help people. Well, there are people that need help right now. So let's go help them. Let's find people who are being disrespected by their local governments and help organize their community and our membership of people across the country and the public around that cause. And in doing so, not just help those folks, but also have it shine as an example of what happens when we aren't being respected as individual human beings, and contrast it with how things can be better if we are respecting each other as individual human beings. And that leads directly into libertarianism, why we believe what we believe, and why it works better. And that's what got me here. And the terrifying city councils is just what happens when I show up and remind them of what it is they're doing and why it's bad. I really, it's funny when if you look at the videos I've put out and people are like, this guy's, he's, really dressing them down. And it's like, well, I don't really yell. I don't call them names. I just tell them what they've done. I remind them, like, let's put aside whatever ordinance or bylaw or whatever thing you're hiding behind. Here's what you're actually doing. Here's the harm it's causing. And you can choose not to do this.
What has been the reaction as you go in here? Is this a situation where these folks are not used to being challenged, and when they do, they react with condescension? They really don't like you? Or is this, do you get a different kind of reaction where they're open and they want to hear what you have to say? What do you see when you're out there?
Yeah, so there have been a couple of times where at least some of the council members or some of the officials that I was speaking with had some interest in what I had to say. And in fact, there was actually one case in Manatee County, Florida, a couple of years ago when I flew in to talk about a bill that it was basically a weaponized snitching bill. And I explained to them just what kind of a Pandora's box they were about to open with this thing. If it wasn't destroyed in the courts, they would end up, being able to, future councils there and across the country would be able to subvert the Constitution whenever they wanted to, because they were using the civil system and snitching instead of the criminal system. Anyway, so I went and kind of explained it to him, and I was able to change enough of the council members' minds that it went from being almost a sure thing that it was going to pass to where they ended up killing the bill. But most of the time when I'm showing up, they are not happy. In fact, most of the time they don't even know I'm going to show up, or they may have heard a little bit, but they don't really know what's about to happen. And they're definitely, you mentioned them not being used to being challenged. They are not used to it. When I spoke at the Columbia City Council, they were agog. They were like, so the way their council works is usually someone will come up and give a speech or talk, or whatever it is they come to talk about, and the council will ask them questions or respond to what they said, and it's kind of more of a conversational thing. So I got up and delivered my talk for a couple minutes, and there was nothing. Like, it was like deer in headlights, and a couple of them had stopped looking and they were just looking down. And it was like they had completely, and it was funny because then other people got up to speak on behalf of the cause that I was talking about. And after maybe one or two after me, they started like talking again. But it was like I kind of shell shocked them, because I don't think that they were used to someone coming in and comparing their actions to that of a bunch of gangsters or sociopaths, and telling them that if they're just doing their jobs, that their jobs are objectively evil and they should quit and they should do something else that isn't terrible and isn't hurting their community members and neighbors. And I don't think they were the least bit used to that. But what we're finding is, after that initial shock and maybe even some anger when the thousands of emails get sent to them from across the country, and their social media is ruined with people, telling them that they should not do what they're doing. After a while, then our local activists and the people we're working with there are able to reach out to them and say, hey, look, this is happening because of what you're doing. This anger is understandable and justified. And here's what we're proposing. You didn't want to listen to us before, but now that everyone's mad at you, maybe you'll listen. And we've had a fairly, roughly 3 out of 4 odds of them coming around to our side. But that's not what happens when I show up. That's when the deer in headlights happens.
It reminds me of that scene from Braveheart, where the king turns and says, "Who is this man who speaks to me as if I care what he says?" it seems like it's very much like that. I've gone to, I go to our city council meetings here, and I remember the first time I went down there, I couldn't believe the way that they I'll tell you that I started talking, and I talked about the fact that when they send a letter to a person, when they have the chief of police deliver letters to people's houses, that's a use of force, that government is force, and that they're saying, here, this is a threat of force. If you don't do this, bad things are going to happen.
Yep.
And I tried to explain that, that government is force. And this guy who's on the city council, who I went to high school with, he looks at me and he says, well, how is that a use of force? Why don't you go ahead and explain that to us, since you're so much smarter than all of us?
Well, since you asked, sure.
Well, see, Spike, sometimes I don't control my mouth that well. And I know this guy, and that came out of nowhere, man. He said that, and it went exactly like this. Since you're so much smarter than all of us, and I went, well, I'm smarter than at least one of you.
Mm.
And then they weren't listening to me so much after that.
No, that was.
But I don't think they were listening to me to start with, and I shouldn't have said that. It was just, I'm like, why are you talking to me like this?
He set you up. I mean, to be fair,
yeah.
he threw you a change up. You had to knock it out of the park.
But there's another time where I just went and I talked about the fact that we have a problem with our communities because we turn so many of our problems over to government to solve. When our neighbor has a problem with our neighbor, they don't knock on our neighbor's door. They go talk to City Hall, and City Hall talks to the chief of police, and the chief of police either sends a letter or sends an officer. And so we're dealing with all our problems through force or threat of force rather than actually communicating to one another. And we'd solve a lot of our problems if City Hall would just back off, know its role. And so I just took my 5 minutes to say that one night. I didn't blast anyone. A few weeks later, I'm at the city council hall meeting, and I don't know, I'm just sitting there. I'm strictly there to observe this night. And out of nowhere, this guy goes, well, I know we're all supposed to be friends and neighbors and hold hands and be nice to one another, but sometimes you just got to put down the law. And I'm like, I didn't even say anything, man. So that's why I'm curious if when you show up, are you getting this kind of heat, this kind of feedback, this kind of, who is this person coming in here and who do they think they are even challenging us?
Yeah, I get that in their eyes, but I also tend to come in like a wrecking ball. I am very much the bad cop. Like, if it's reached a point where we've had to fly me in to come and speak to the council, it's because we've already gotten involved. We've already tried to talk with them. We've maybe even put some things on social media. We've reached out to them, through whatever channels we can to try to figure out how we can work this out, and are either being ignored or told, we're not gonna, we have no interest in working with you, and sometimes they double and triple down on whatever bad actions they were taking. So usually when I come in, it's to do something in front of them that has possibly never happened before, where I'm sure they've had, some of them may have had people show up to the city council meeting and get angry and yell and scream and wave their arms around, and probably reach a level where they can actually justifiably have a cop come and say, hey, calm it down or whatever. They don't have anyone come in and loudly, civilly explain to them what their problem is, why it's causing harm, and what's going to happen if they don't back off. And so I don't think they're used to that, because I now say, now that we have the proof of concept out there, I now let them know millions of people are going to see this, And thousands or even tens of thousands of them are going to reach out to you about it. And it's going to get worse and worse the longer it goes on. And so I'm literally explaining, like, what you're doing is bad. You're either doing it because you're objectively evil, which I don't think is the case, or you're doing it because you've convinced yourself that when you're on that side of the dais or the table or the whatever you're behind, when you're sitting there in your official capacity, that you're just doing your job. But you're the same person that if you were on this side of the table, you were doing the same thing. We'd all stop you. We'd all rush to stop you, and you'd never do that because you're not a sociopath and you're not an evil person. But you get on that side of the table, and suddenly what you're doing is policy. But it's not. It's just you choosing to do that and other people choosing to go along with it and people suffering as a result of it. And so not only do they get me kind of dressing them down, but I dress down their whole narrative behind why they're even doing it in the first place. And so usually what I get is kind of this combination of slack-jawed, not, like that, or just people a lot of them will just start looking away or shutting down. A couple have actually gotten up and walked away. That's rare, but they'll usually then, when the heat starts coming down, especially on social media, then they lash out. But usually when I'm there, they don't say very much, and I think it's because I come out of seemingly out of nowhere and shell shock them a little bit. And we call it a vibe check, and I think that little bit of a vibe check kind of helps reset their expectations here. Like, you're going to be seen as the bad guy. You're going to have to defend yourself in front of local media, social media, and initially thousands or millions of strangers, but eventually your neighbors and the people that your colleagues and associates who go, what is going on with this? Why do you really have to do this? It's going to keep getting worse until you do the right thing. And, we try to keep our calls to action for them very simple. Like, stop doing this. Stop trying to steal this person's home. Stop trying to kick this old man off of his grandkid's property. Stop trying to arrest someone for feeding their friend. Stop, real basic things. I'm not calling for them to pass SB 183.5 or whatever. Like, it's literally like, don't do this terrible thing that you would never do if you weren't sitting where you are.
So do you have like walkout music? Like if you were a pro wrestler, you come in.
No,
maybe a smoke machine and strobes. That would be awesome.
If the bylaws allowed it, I would do the smoke machine and the strobe lights. Music, I don't know. I guess the what dun, 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 that I could see, like the Ric Flair music. I know that's not what it's called, but is it Canon and D? What?
Could be something like that.
The Ric Flair music. That I would do. Short of that, I think just the strobe lights and the smoke machine would be good. I can almost guarantee that most of the councils I've spoken to would deem that to be some kind of a hazard to do that in the middle of a council meeting, but whatever.
So you mentioned libertarianism earlier. Can you tell me what you think libertarianism is in simple terms?
In a nutshell, libertarians believe that we do best when we're most free. They recognize that many of the problems that we're facing is a result of too much centralization of power and control in the hands of too few people who are very often completely removed from the situation, and that the answer to those, the solution to those problems, or really the way to not create the problems in the first place, is to take that power back and put it back in the hands of individual people where it always belonged.
Sounds like anarchy.
It can be. It can also be. It can also be. Here's the thing. I mean, me. I'm an anarcho-capitalist, but I also routinely am citing the Constitution, because if we are to have a government, which most people are behind the we should have a government narrative, fine, okay, then that government, if it has a founding charter which explicitly limits it to only a handful of powers and says that its main purpose is to defend lives, or to affirm and defend lives, rights, and property, and that most of its chartering, its chartering documents are limiting it and not us, okay, fine. Then abide by that. If that's what you're swearing an oath to uphold when you get into these positions of power, then do that. And if you're not doing that, then you're the bad. You're telling me or not you, but they'll often say, oh, well, you're a libertarian. You just want chaos. You've created the chaos. Your role was to explicitly protect and defend and affirm lives, rights, and property. And you are swearing an oath to documents that limit your power and affirm ours, and then you do the opposite. By this person's definition, they're the anarchist in that they're imposing their state on us while living in anarchy for themselves and doing whatever they want for themselves. So, if there's chaos that's happening, it's because of people that aren't keeping with what they say is their job, which is to uphold and defend and affirm lives, rights, and property.
And now we even have governors who are coming right out and saying, well, that doesn't really mean we have to do that all the time.
That was wild. Are you talking about in New Mexico?
Yeah.
That was insane. Now, there was a part of me that actually was glad that she was finally saying it, because really she was saying what so many other governors, presidents, senators, congresspeople, city council people are demonstrating, that their oath means nothing. It's all whatever they think they need to accomplish for, whatever means they believe will be justified by the ends. And she just came out and said it. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but the governor of New Mexico, she out of nowhere says, we have a public health emergency of gun violence. I think it's like 2 children had been killed in a tragic shooting, and she said, so no one is allowed to carry in this county, just this one county, not even though we'll say this one county, no one's allowed to carry for any reason unless they're a police officer. And I know that I have no authority to do this, and that, I'm actually forbidden from doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And she said, I want to make sure I'm trying not to butcher it, but it was something along the lines of, nothing is absolute, not even my oath of office, which means she was flat out admitting that she was violating her oath of office, which is grounds for removal and possibly criminal action.
She's basically saying at any time that I deem it necessary, I can suspend my oath of office, I can ignore the Constitution, and I can act in any way that I want to enforce laws, to protect rights, or to even violate rights that I swore to defend.
Yeah.
At any moment, all I have to do is say, this is an emergency. I'm now taking all this power. It's all mine. And be happy I'm here.
And and I know that I'm breaking the law in doing so. Tough. What are you going to do about it? And that was, like I said, if she's going to do it, admit that that's what you're doing. I mean, I would have liked for a lot of these, some of the worst COVID lockdown governors to just come flat out and say, yeah, I'm completely abdicating any semblance of my oath of office here, and I'm taking powers that don't belong to me, and I'm carving out favors for my buddies, and but I'm doing it for the right reasons. So and there's nothing anyone can do about it. What are you going to do? I got the cops on my side. Like I wish some of them had just been honest and said that that's what it was, because I do think a lot of people, because of a combination of normalcy bias and not wanting to believe some of the uncharitable ways that we talk about government, they want to believe that whatever they're doing, it is for our own good. They do mean the right thing, and they are doing their job. Maybe they're not doing it well, but what they're doing is largely a good thing. If they were honest about it, if the officials were honest about it, the average voter, the average member of the public would have to see that these are gangsters. Like these are people that have this sort of legalized, codified mob, and they just exert the authority because they have the guns and the power behind them, and because most people have been kind of conditioned to believe that this is how things should be done. And so if you don't like it, tough, and I think there'd be a lot, put it this way, I think there'd be a lot more libertarians if more officials were that nakedly honest about what it is they're doing. So I actually would like to see. I don't want to see them doing it, but if they are going to do it, be honest about it. Say what the New Mexico governor said.
When you're out there, how often do you get pushback from the citizenry? When I know you have people who ask you to come to towns and
Yeah.
they brought you there. How often do the other citizens in town take issue with what you're doing? Do you see a lot of people who say this is what government's here for, this is what they should be doing?
Rarely. Every once in a while, we'll have someone that is either at the council meeting or comes to one of our rallies or whatever, and will either say, I agree with whatever thing they're doing, or more often than not, they don't say that. They go, well, you don't live here, and this is our government. And I'd say for every time someone shows up, which again, it's very rare, but for any time that someone shows up and says, I agree with whatever thing they're doing, there's far more people, still a very small percentage, but there are at least a few more people who go, well, this is our local government. And they do this like weird nativism thing where they're like, oh, you don't live here, so that means you shouldn't have an opinion about it. And we have our stand. Like, I mean, it's funny because like when I was in Columbia, people were like, "You don't live here," and I'm like, "I live 3 counties away. I'm in Myrtle Beach. Like, it's not. I'm not from like Iowa or Timbuktu. I'm from the same state. I'm literally. It took me 2 hours to get here, or 2.5 hours to get. Like, I mean, it's not. I'm not from a faraway land. But anyway, so like, but we have our responses to that, and sometimes the officials will say it too when they're like, "Oh, yeah, you don't even go here," and we'll say, "Yeah, you're right. It's a tragedy that." People who live hundreds or even thousands of miles away care more about the people here than you do. That's a crying shame. And of course, if it's a member of the public saying it, we'll say, yeah, it's a real shame that there are people that live hundreds of miles away that care more about you than these officials do. And, very often, if they start with that and we say, yeah, no, it's terrible that they're doing this thing and that people are having to come from all over the country and all over the state to speak out against it because of how terrible it is. That reflects poorly on this community, and is that they're doing this in your name without even having your agreement to it. And so we're able to change some people on that, but I mean sometimes a lot of people, they're just in the mindset of I don't want to hear about it. Like if it's not directly affecting me, I don't want to hear about it. I came here because my daughter was being recognized for, being on the winning volleyball team or whatever, and you're coming here and complaining about something. I don't want to hear about this. But that's very rare. We get very little pushback from the public. Most people, when they hear the story, they go, whatever the cause is, they'll say, wow, that's terrible. They're doing that? Wow, oh gosh, I didn't know that. They may not get involved, but at the very least, they're like, yeah, I see why you're here. It's very rare we get pushback.
So what's been the most absurd or tragic or just maybe infuriating story that you've seen?
That's a tough one. Wow, because they're all like really the ones we tend to go public with, where we aren't just doing behind the scenes stuff, are ones where they are just so egregious and so heartbreaking and so infuriating. Where it's like, why are you doing this? Like I'm sure you consider yourself a moral person, but yet you're doing this. I don't know. I'll tell you one, and it was one that we didn't actually have to do a heck of a lot, because once we and some others put it on social media, they turned around pretty quickly. But the one that really got me the most angry was a case in Dallas, Texas. A young couple, a young married couple, was having their, I believe, second or third child. I think it was third. And they wanted this one to be a home birth, so they did a home birth. They got a midwife, and they got they had the professional midwife and at-home water birth and all of that stuff. And the baby was perfectly fine and healthy, and the birth went off without a hitch. A day or so later, a couple days later that week, whatever later, they did a newborn checkup with a pediatrician, and the pediatrician was not happy that they had the kid at home. And the pediatrician said, well, the kid is a little jaundiced, and here's a procedure that should be done, some mild thing that needed to be done. And they said, okay, well, give us the information about it, and we'll have our midwife do it. And so he gave them the information, and actually, I'm not sure if he gave them the information or said he was going to, but what he did do was at midnight that night, he called Dallas CPS and said this child's being neglected and abused. And because it was a newborn, they jumped on it at I think that morning. They detained the parents and took the newborn baby from them. Now, I'm going to be, just to be as charitable as possible to the government. You get a call at midnight from a pediatrician saying this kid's being abused. Okay, maybe you jump in real quick and you say, okay, we got to make sure everything's okay. Is there any sign of abuse? The last thing we'd want is to go, well, we got to go through the process and then the kid ends up dead. Okay, fine, I get it. They took the kid. There was no sign of abuse. There was no sign of neglect. They took the kid. And for weeks, they kept the kid. They would only allow the parents to see the child in very brief supervised visits, during which in one of them, they found that the kid was developing a rash in her private area. And they said to the social worker or the CPS worker, whatever, they said, this kid's in foster care. This newborn child's in foster care. And they said, she has a rash. Can we take her to a doctor to have this taken care of? And they said, no, you've let us know. We'll let the foster family know about that. She's not yours right now. She's not your responsibility. Anyway, so this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. We and some other local organizations found out about it, blasted it on social media, and within a matter of a couple days, the baby was back home with her family, just proving that they just were kind of sitting on it. It was more like this bureaucratic thing where it was like, well, it's in our docket and we'll get to it when we get to it. And then once it got enough attention and they realized they had nothing, the kid was back home without any incident afterwards. That was the one. I mean, I could go through all the causes and they're all egregious and infuriating and disgusting and just nonsensical in their own way. That one made me angry. That one made me like I wanted bad things to happen to the people that were doing this. And I had to be very careful how I was wording it on social media, that I wasn't, inadvertently calling for violence because of how angry I was. And I didn't do anything like that, but I was that at my core angry. I actually had to calm myself down as I'm writing it and as I'm reading about it. And I mean, it's great that the kid's back home, but yeah, that was the one that just like that's about the angriest I've been in a long time.
I'm angry just hearing about it, and yep. I wasn't going through it. And what I think infuriates me the most is it wasn't even a matter of weeks after you got involved. I mean, as soon as the heat came down, they were like,
yep.
Turn the kid back over to him.
It was probably, if it wasn't 48 hours, it was like 72. Like, it was days later. It was.
And how long had they how long had they kept custody of that child that they didn't need to? How long were they kept from loving parents when they didn't need to be? How long did those parents hurt? How many nights of sleep did they lose? How many nights did they cry themselves to sleep because they didn't know where their daughter was, what was happening to them? I can understand why you would be angry. I'm angry, and I've heard 5 minutes of it.
And she was a days-old newborn. These are the formative days where they build their bonds with their parents. I know some people in my some family members of mine, they had a child and no one else but the parents saw the child for the first like 2 weeks or something like that. It had some theory about bonding or whatever. Like these are the times where the child is building core memories that they won't even remember except in their subconscious about who their mother and father are. Like, I mean, and instead they're being shipped through a foster care system. And I want to say it was the better part of a month that they had this kid. It might have only been a couple of weeks, but these are this is when hours matter in terms of bonding and development and things like that. I mean, there could be latent trauma that this kid experiences for the rest of her life, for all we know. Just that, to have that happen in the opening days of its life, it's disgusting. And it's what happens when a bunch of otherwise good people, I don't think anyone involved in that, not the pediatrician, not the CPS worker, not the cops, not the social workers, not even maybe the foster family. No one in that group of people woke up and said, what terrible things can I do to children today? They woke up and thought, I'm just doing my job. And they get stuck in this sort of humdrum, I think the phrase is the banality of evil. They get caught up in, oh, well, time to, press the buttons and sign the documents and check the check boxes and almost completely disassociate from what it is that they're actually doing to actual human beings.
It reminds me of the quote by C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite quotes. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
Yes.
Where he says, of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep, his cupidity may at some time be satiated, but those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience.
Yep,
and I
absolutely.
think that's what we saw there.
And over time, it becomes boring to them. Like they do it, but they aren't even, they're checked out. Not only do they think they're doing the right thing, they're barely even there. They're yawning through this stuff. One of the things that has struck me showing up to some of these city council meetings, they will be talking about essentially destroying people's lives. And they will be fight, because usually these meetings are 4, 5, 6 p.m. They're fighting to stay awake. They're having a cup of coffee just to be able to get through the things without they occasionally see their eyes close for a second or two. They're making little cute comments to each other about, oh well, I can't wait till this is over, because they're tired, and because it's bringing no energy out of them, because it's that mundane and humdrum and boring. And on the other side of the dais will be people pleading for them not to do what they're doing. And it is incredible to see it over and over again and I think part of it's a coping mechanism. I think part of it is the reason they're saying, oh, well, what a boring thing, is because I think if they really took a step back and thought about what it is they were doing, they'd be horrified. They would quit, or they'd never do what they're doing again. But they have to tell themselves, well, this is just part of the job. Well, it's a really boring thing that I have to do. And it's horrific. I mean, I'm sure... we can talk about some of the most extreme examples, the Holocaust or the Great Leap Forward or whatever. I'm sure some of the people carrying out some of the worst atrocities were yawning through it. And thinking about, oh man, I hope my wife made, my favorite pot roast when I get home. I just... the same way we would be checked out while we're checking emails or if you work in a restaurant and you're cooking a meal or you're taking people's order and you're like barely there. I think a lot of times they get that way too. It just becomes like routine what they're doing.
I think that might be because so many of these folks have grown up in a world where that's just what the government does. Yeah. And the idea of an alternative to that, the idea that government doesn't do this is just so completely foreign to them that it's almost, you instantly reject it, because that's what the government does. The government does this. I remember talking with a group in Indiana, and I said, okay, let's just do a thought experiment here. What if tomorrow the state comes out and says, effective immediately, we're not doing education anymore? There's no government funding for education. All the public schools are closed. All the teachers have been dismissed. All the administrators have been served their papers. They're all going home. Education is now the sole responsibility of the parents and the private sector. If government didn't do that, education anymore, would parents just go, well, I guess my kid's going to be stupid then? No. Or what would they do? If government didn't do the things that it's doing right now, if it's strictly focused on what you described earlier, securing and defending the rights of the individual, staying in its lane, if it didn't do that, what would happen? And people they start thinking about that, and there's like almost like a void there. Even though you go back and you look at the origins of the United States, you go back and look at what Alexis de Tocqueville wrote, And when he talks about democracy in America, he says, wherever you'd see government in France doing this, there's an association in America doing it.
Yep. Yep.
And we used to have mutual aid societies. We used to have organizations. And since I did that thought experiment in Indiana, we watched COVID happen. And what did governments do? We're not doing schools. We're closing those down. And what did we see? We saw the creativity and the spontaneous order of parents across the country as they came together and said, how are we going to solve this problem? And they came with ideas. And I think that's honestly, bureaucrats across America are looking at that going, oh, we probably shouldn't have done that. Not because it was wrong for the kids, but because so many parents out there are seeing, wait a second, we're seeing what you taught. And actually, we think we can do it better this way, and they're pulling their kids out. And I think a lot of bureaucrats regret that because you're seeing this increase in homeschooling and so forth. But it's just that mental model that I could sit and tell you all these things that would be better, but if I say to you, well, what if government didn't do that, what would happen? And they figure it out on their own, I think that's where you see a lot of change happening.
Yeah, what's very interesting is I've been told stories about after the Soviet, or as the Soviet Union was collapsing, because it didn't happen, the narratives that it happened overnight, but it was obvious for at least a few days that something big was about to happen. And one of the common sentiment that the average Soviet Russian citizen had was, who's going to run the store? Like, how are we going to get food? How are we going, we're going to starve to death. How are we going to get the things that we need? And the idea that the market could provide food in a market was insane to them. Like, it was so foreign. And so we'll hear that story and go, well, those silly Russians, of course you could have a store. But then the average American, if you talk about the fact that taxation is extortion, what's the first thing they say? But how would we have roads and bridges and parks and libraries? And it's like, really? Like, that's what I could see. I can understand the argument of saying, oh, without having the coercive authority of government, you can't truly have a body that can arbitrate, have binding arbitration of disputes. You need to have a central authority to prosecute those who are violating the rights of others. And even though it in and of itself is a de facto violation of rights, it's a necessary evil to blah blah. Like, I understand that the night watchman state argument. Okay, the roads. You can't without your local officials, all the way from the federal government all the way down to local officials skimming at every single level and striking deals with their crony, well-heeled buddies. You couldn't possibly otherwise find a way to put asphalt on the ground and flatten it so you can drive on it. Like, it's the most insane thing to me. But it's because we're conditioned that's how you get roads, unless it's some little private road for your subdivision or whatever. You would absolutely need the government for that. Why? Well, because how are they going to figure out how to procure the land? By buying it and figuring out who's willing to part with land in exchange for money so you can build the thoroughfares. And the main funders of it would be the people who have the most vested interest in you being able to get to them and them being able to get to you, which means you probably wouldn't even be paying anything out of pocket for it. Like, of course that would work. But it's a lack of imagination, and we'll laugh at the communist who thinks, well, how would I get food without it? And then we go, well, how would I be able to drive on the road without it?
It's really it's really a matter of getting them to figure that out themselves. I mean, like you said, we could tell them that. One thing that I've asked them when we've had this conversation, one of the first things I remember somebody saying was, "Don't talk about roads. Just don't even bring it up." And I thought, well, they're going to bring it up. Shouldn't we have an argument about it? Should we have some way of thinking about this? And so I remember one of the first times I was really talking this philosophy in front of a class, and they said, well, what about roads? And I said, well, let's talk about roads. And man, they was just like, oh. we said don't talk about roads. And the first thing he does is,
like you said, you have to. If they say, what about roads? And you go, well, I don't want to talk about that. They think they've owned you. Like,
we got you.
Know about roads.
We got you. And everything you say after that is completely ignored.
Yep.
So what I said was, okay, well, who profits from the road? Okay, well, then they start listing, well, the stores do, Walmart, Amazon. I was like, okay, well, what if the people who profited from the road actually, could they come together and form some sort of private organization? Yeah, well, couldn't that focus be serving their best interests by getting customers to their stores and getting their trucks to and fro safely? Couldn't they focus on these things? Well, yeah, I suppose they could. And could they collaborate with other businesses, say like that maybe own cement trucks and want roads to do these? Well, yeah. I was like, well, let's take 10 minutes and talk about how that could actually happen. I'm not going to tell you that could happen, but could you see it happening? Let's talk about that. And we get in these ruts, these comfortable ruts where we don't think about these things because we're comfortable, honestly. And we're comfortable with the abuse that we take a lot. And it's just opening people's eyes to that and saying, well, maybe we shouldn't be comfortable with this. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what you're doing when you're out there. One of the things that blew my mind when I was writing about politics in Missouri, somebody pointed out that you can get fines from the government. And I can't remember the town, but it was down by Ferguson. They said you can get fined if the blinds in your house don't match. I said, what now? And they just were, well, that's just what government does. And I don't know. There's a lot you know me, I could sit here and talk all night, but
without government, Duane, who would make sure your blinds matched?
Right.
Like there's someone out there who thinks that. Probably way more than we care to think. There are people who are legitimately like, yeah, but without the government, people's homes would look stupid because their like doors wouldn't match and their blinds. Like, yeah, no one has a sense of aesthetic except politicians and bureaucrats. And
I've heard this argument. You've heard this argument. It's about property values. My property values would go down, and you should see the look on their faces when you say, "Well, do you have a right to the worth of your house right now?" Yes, I do. I was like, did you have the right to it before the government destroyed the housing market in 2008? Who was responsible for that?
Well,
and they don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
So it's okay if your neighbor has mismatched blinds, we can use force against them, but when the government does it, well, I don't have a right to that, I guess. Yeah. It's okay when they do it. Let me ask you this. You mentioned taxes.
Especially when, if you compare, like, how much it affects your property value because one of your neighbors, like, doesn't keep up with the lawn or has an RV in their driveway or their blinds don't match, compared to when the government prints out trillions of dollars in Federal Reserve notes, or has the Federal Reserve print out trillions of notes to service their debt, thereby not only creating future taxes with interest in your name and the names of people that haven't even been born yet, but also by inflating the monetary supply, dwindling the value of your currency, and causing this bubble popping in the market, which leads you to lose value in your property in both real terms and in the terms of the actual purchasing power of the dollar value of your property. Which one of those was more harmful to you? It's not even comparable. Anyway. You had a question. I'm sorry. I didn't mean.
No, that goes back to what is seen and unseen. I mean, this goes very much to Bastiat. There's what is seen. And when Bastiat was talking about it, of course, he was talking about policy. And I used to bring this up a lot in trade. You know, you'll see those guys in the hard hats when the steel mill opens and we got 700 new jobs. That's what's seen. But what is not seen are the 30,000 jobs that never appear because those construction jobs that might have appeared no longer happen. But you see the same thing. This is what you see. You see your neighbor's house, the blinds don't match, and I suppose my house isn't worth less. But you don't see on the evening news, well, this is what's driving inflation. What you see is, you see this siloing. It's the Democrats are saying it's the Republican policy from this area, and the Democrats are saying Joe Biden is the worst president since, the last FDR or whatever.
Yes.
And there's no real deep discussion on what's actually happening. It's all theater. It's all theater, sadly. Let me ask you, but let's wrap this up in an hour. I didn't know how long. I mean, you and I could sit here and talk.
That's the problem. when we schedule this, I'm like, we're gonna be talking till like 1 a.m, aren't we? Because this is just
Exactly.
gonna keep going.
Exactly. Somebody said, "How long's your podcast going to be?" And I was like, "I don't know.
I don't know.
We could talk for
We're
a
gonna find
long
out together.
time."
Yeah.
And one of the things that I hear a lot as a libertarian, if I'm talking to Republicans, I just want to smoke dope. That's all I want. And I'm like, I'm the lamest libertarian you've ever met. I've never done a drug in my life. I didn't really drink until I was in the Navy, and then it wasn't until I was legal. I mean, I don't do drugs, so it's not that. But if I'm talking to, a Republican, I just want to smoke dope. If I'm talking to a Democrat, I hate taxes. So, how do we get past that? Is there, in your mind, have you had any success in reaching out to one side or the other and getting them out of their silos so they can better understand what it is that you're actually about?
Yeah, so there's actually, I can answer that in two ways. When people do the you just want to smoke dope or you just want to, whatever the thing is, I'm a recovering drug addict. I live in a, traditional monogamous, single, heterosexual, one wife, relationship. Like from a social libertine nature, I'm as traditional, just about as traditional as it gets. And from a whatever the left wing narrative about us is we're selfish and we only care about ourselves. I run a nonprofit where we literally do nothing but help people all day long. Like this, so they're very, very rarely are any of their stereotypes come anywhere close to who I am. So it's usually very easy for me to rebut that. But I actually go past that. I decided that the main bulk of my work was going to be not arguing with people anymore, and not even necessarily trying to talk with them about ideas initially. I wanted to first, instead, find things we already agree on and give them a call to action to help me, and then have the conversation about why I believe that this is wrong, and then build out from there. And there's this. Have you ever heard of the theory of disbursement of ideas? It's not disbursement. Theory of.
Yeah, where you have the early adopters and
you have
the innovators,
you have the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, late majority, and the laggards. And if you follow that model, basically what you need to start with is we care about this thing that you probably care about too. You start with that, and then you build out from there. And the thing you say after we care about this, it's we care about this thing, here's how you can help us, here's why we do this. And if you build it out that way, you speak to broader society in the order of the people who are the most likely to listen to you, but you're also getting past people's cognitive defenses that they put up. I'm not trying to tell you why you should be libertarian, either small L or big L. I'm not telling you why you should join the party. I'm not telling you why you should be ideologically libertarian. I'm not doing any of that. I'm actually not even trying to challenge your beliefs. I'm telling you that there is this person or these people, and this terrible thing is happening to them, and here's what we're doing to help them, and here's how you can join us to help them. And then here's another cause that we're working on, and here's how you can help us with that, and here's how you can help us with the next one, and the next one, and the next one. As I'm doing that, I use the same refrain over and over again. These people are not being respected as individuals, and the people who are doing it to them are subverting their expectations that they would normally have for themselves because they're government officials, and they're allowing themselves to do something they'd never do otherwise. They should demand of themselves that they treat people the same way as government officials that they would as private citizens, and we need to demand it of them as well. And the reason we believe that is because we recognize that the best way for us to interact as human beings is by respecting each other as individual human beings. And as you continue to build out the actual belief, that's when you can get into ideas like property rights and how they extend from individual rights, and why the individual even matters, and how individualism is not every man is an island and we're all on our own and no one talks to each other, but that individualism is the basis of respecting each individual person and their boundaries and their lives, and respecting them for who they are and allowing them to live their lives instead of trying to impose on them. And when you start with, here's what we already agree on, and I'm telling you I care about this just like you do, now that you know about it, I'm showing them that we agree on stuff, and I'm showing them that I care. And of course, no one cares what you know until they know that you care. I'm telling them right off the bat, there's something I care about, and it's something I bet you care about too. And here's why it's happening, and here's what you can do to help us. And so I'm very, in my work as the president of You Are the Power, and in my day-to-day work in You Are the Power, I rarely get into it with anyone about policy or ideology or anything else. If they bring it up, I'll say, yeah, I'm a libertarian and I believe this and that. And, that's why I founded You Are the Power, because blah, 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 blah. But I don't really, it's outside of going on shows and talking about libertarianism or doing debates or going on social media and talking about stuff. I don't really, in my day-to-day work with You Are the Power, I don't really try to argue with people about, and if they go, well, I thought you were, I thought you're a libertarian. Yeah, I heard you just like to smoke dope. Ha, that's funny. Anyway, so here's this cause we're working on, and thanks for helping us with it. Here's the next cause we're working on. And the more that works, and I get people becoming far more effective liberty activists, even as they haven't even fully adopted our ideas, than most libertarians are, I've lost the desire to even have the argument with them.
It really starts with listening to understand them first, doesn't it?
Yep.
And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have. It isn't just libertarians that do this. This is something that progressives do, liberals do, conservatives do. As soon as we hear something we don't agree with, there was I don't know if it was a video or something I read. I think it was a video that this person was saying that there's been a study that says we can listen to about 10 seconds of something that we don't agree with before we feel a need to say, no, that's wrong, and let me tell you why.
Sounds about right.
And it is a difficult urge to overcome. But when you can sit there and listen to them and say, I hadn't thought of it that way, tell me more about that, you can start picking up those things where you can find that commonality, and you can say, I agree with that. Let's move forward there.
Yep. And when you do that, if you get good at it, over time, you will find the commonality between what they really believe and what you believe. There's going to be differences, obviously. It's not we're not all thinking the exact same thing. But when you start hearing I think this is a human right, I think that's a human right, I think this should be free, and you really drill, especially if you keep saying, tell me more, why is it you think that, what does that mean to you? What you suddenly start hearing is people who want everyone to have a fair shake and to be able to make ends meet and to, not struggle with, some we all have struggles that happen, and no one should become bankrupted because they had one struggle, and no one should end up homeless because of a handful of bad things that happened to them or whatever. And they're right. They're 100% right about all of those things. They just got taken down the wrong path of how to deal with them. But if you can reach them on the standpoint of, we care about the same things for the same reasons, and build out from there, now you got a much better chance. And like I said, we have active members of You Are the Power who are not just helping us with causes, but actually bringing causes to our attention that we work on with them and do incredible things for the liberty movement. They're not libertarian. And yet, they're very effective liberty activists. They're just beginning to get exposed to our ideas. And I believe over time they will become more libertarian. My favorite phrase, or one of my favorite phrases is, the more you can bring people into your orbit, the more you can affect them with your gravity. The more they're around us, the more they're going to adopt our ideas and our thoughts and our way of thinking of things, just because, first of all, our ideas make the most sense, naturally speaking. And second of all, just the more you're around hearing something, the more likely you are to start at least hearing their side of the story. But if nothing else, if they never adopt our ideas, the absolute worst case scenario is that I have leveraged my political foes to grow the liberty movement. That's the worst case scenario. So if that's the worst case scenario, then I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
So how do people get involved with You Are the Power?
So if you go to youarethepower.com, you can find out everything about it, and you can become a member if you're able to donate. That is helpful as well. We need as much resources as we can get, but more than anything, we want you to be a part of it. So we've made membership free. We have paid memberships that help sustain the cost of keeping You Are the Power going and being able to expand and take on even more causes. But if you're in a position where you can't afford to pay, or you want to see what it's like before you start paying, membership is we always have a free membership, and members are members. We don't have tiers of membership. The different paid levels come with different perks and or different swag and things like that. But in terms of membership, all members are members. So we'd love for you to join us. If you go to youarethepower.com, we'd love for you to be a part of it.
Very cool. Listen, we started down a road that I love to talk about.
Yes.
Selling freedom, how to talk to people, and we're in danger now of this becoming a second hour into this talk.
Yes.
So I'm going to stop it right now, but I do want to come back to this at a future date.
Absolutely.
And talk about how are we going to get past, because one thing I was hoping to talk about and I never got to it. I'm reading this book right now called I Never Thought of It That Way. And the subtitle is How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. And it opened me up to a concept. It introduced a concept to me that I was hoping we could talk about. We didn't get a chance to, but we will next time. Of this fact that we as humans, when we first start meeting people, we start sorting them. Those people are like me. Those people are not like me.
Yep.
I'm going to stick with my like group. And we see this all the time. It's just what humans do. And after you start sorting people, then you start othering them. Well, those Democrats, they don't agree with me. And those Republicans, they're different than me. They're not my tribe. This is my tribe. So we start othering. And then once we start othering, then the really super dangerous stuff starts when we start siloing. And that's when I'm only going to talk to you. You're only going to talk to me. We're only going to let news in from Fox News. Oh, wait, Fox News is too liberal. Now I have to go over to Newsmax or One American News, or I can only go to MSNBC. And the only thing that gets into my silo are things that I agree with. And the more that happens, the more extreme you get. So now Democrats are no longer wrong. Republicans are no longer wrong. They're evil.
They're evil.
They're evil. They are, and I don't know how many times I've heard. I debated with someone briefly. I don't find myself debating on social media much anymore. I remember one day I looked at it and went, time's finite, and I have 9 kids.
Yes.
I'm gonna go do something better than this.
Yes.
But
yes.
Somebody said something like socialists want to destroy America. And I was like, I don't think they do. I think what they want to do is create the most equal society where people have food, and they really think that this is the way they're just wrong.
They're just very wrong. Yep.
And they don't want to, I don't know, I can't think of any socialist I've ever met that's been like, if we do this, think of all the people we'll kill. It's going to be awesome.
They'll die. Yep,
yeah.
Yep. Now, along the way, they start othering people. They start dehumanizing people. Certain people are going to have to go to gulag. But we see that on the other side too, right? We see a lot of people that, when their utopia happens, there are going to be some necessary deaths of some very evil people. And it's that, what you were describing, that process, which, by the way, is how cults form, where an idea system becomes a closed-in idea system, which becomes everyone else who doesn't agree with us is bad, which becomes we must do terrible things to them because they're a threat to us. That's how, belief systems turn into cults, turn into violent cults.
Yeah, she talks about this thing in here. She calls it the assumption spiral. I'm going to put my glasses on because it's in small print and I'm old. And she says the assumption spiral is my vote against the candidate I despise is a vote for things that actually feel absolutely good and important. Therefore, a vote for the candidate I despise must be a vote against these good and important things. Yep. And therefore, anyone who votes for the candidate I despise must be against good and important things. and therefore anyone who votes for the candidate must be a bad person.
Yep.
And it's very easy to then other someone into them being evil while you sit in your silo and make assumptions. So that's why I'm glad that you brought up the fact that you get to know people and then find out what's important to them. And those those kind of things are that's the only thing that's going to change this polarization. And I want to end with a quote from here, and I'm sure you use this too. The quote that I read that really hit me was, "The shortest distance between two people is a story."
Yep.
And I think you've seen that. So I don't know. Again, we could sit and chat for another hour or two about these things, but I want to wrap it up because, like I said, I've got kids I'm going to go see.
You have 9 kids in a finite life, yes.
Yep. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. We are going to do this again. Thanks for being here, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and I'm happy to do it in the future.